And again, this is a bipartisan effort. You go back to the Bush administration. One of the things that President Bush did, actually twice in his administration, was when he wanted to stimulate the economy, tried to lower income tax rates, but not only lower the rates, so on April 15th you might get a bigger refund or you won't be paying as much next year. He actually sent out checks in the mail to people to stimulate the economy. What's the idea behind that? Well, if you go back to the ideas of John Maynard Keynes, the idea is that if you, the budget deficits tend to stimulate the economy. If you cut taxes, if you increase government spending, that provides a fiscal stimulus to the economy. So by spending more, government spending can prop up overall spending. And you want to do this without raising taxes, because if you increase taxes, that's going to take money out of the hands of the of spenders in the economy. So if you run a budget deficit, that stimulates the economy. That's the logic behind it. And if you've taken a little bit of macroeconomics, you probably recognize this as standard Keynesian macroeconomic policy. Does the economy really work that way? When President Bush was elected, the federal budget was in surplus. And for 8 years during the Bush administration, Bush cut taxes, he increased government spending, so budget deficits got larger and larger and larger. If budget deficits really stimulated the economy, at the end of the Bush administration, we would have been in nirvana, not in the worst recession since the Great Depression. And while this is probably not a good time to digress very much into Keynesian economic policy, I mean, what the analysis looks at is the amount of money that's being put into the economy. It doesn't look at where that money's coming away from. Right? So if the government's spending more money, that money has to come from somewhere. So consumers are squeezed a little bit, crowded out. Investors are crowded out a little bit through government borrowing. And so you can see the increase in government spending. What you don't see is the crowding out that occurs in the private sector. So once again, we have a policy that that undermines the workings of the market economy. And the fourth thing I want to talk about is the bailouts. I've talked about this a little bit already because I've talked about the bailouts of the banks and the financial firms. But the bailouts go further than that. Of course, as we're well aware, we bailed out General Motors and Chrysler as well. And again, I want to emphasize the bipartisan nature of the policy here, because the bailouts for the auto firms started in the Bush administration and were initiated by President Bush himself. You go back to last fall, the auto companies were saying, we're running out of money. We're going to have to declare bankruptcy if we don't get an infusion of cash from the federal government. So they're begging for a bailout from the federal government. And one place that they eyed, if they thought maybe we could get some money from, is the TARP money. Secretary Paulson said, no. That TARP money is earmarked for buying toxic assets from financial institutions. That money is not intended to bail out the auto industry. So the issue went to Congress. Congress debated it. Ultimately, they voted down a bailout for the auto industry, and last December, Secretary Paulson changed his mind on that TARP thing. He gave tens of billions of dollars to the auto industry to bail them out. Where did he get the money? TARP. It was TARP money that bailed out General Motors and Chrysler. Kept them afloat, avoided bankruptcy. And it was only a few months later, in the Obama administration gave them more money. Of course, it's always easier to see things in hindsight. Was that a good idea? No. In June, General Motors and Chrysler declared bankruptcy anyway. The whole reason for supporting them, for giving them that money, was to keep them out of bankruptcy. Did that work? No. They declared bankruptcy. They went into bankruptcy anyway. But the big difference is, if they'd have gone into bankruptcy in December, it would have been a private affair. Maybe they would have been able to reorganize. You may recall earlier in this decade, Delta Airlines went into bankruptcy. They reorganized. Delta Airlines is now the largest air carrier in the United States. You can emerge from bankruptcy, if you have a viable business model. Maybe General Motors and Chrysler would have, maybe not. I don't know. If they could have reorganized, come out of bankruptcy, maybe been like Delta Airlines. If not, then the assets that they had that were valuable would have been purchased by other firms. Right? If their assets have any value, those assets just don't disappear when a firm declares bankruptcy. So if they've got factories and assembly lines that are making valuable cars, somebody else is going to want to buy them. They might not be worth what General Motors would like to get from them. Yeah, so they might end up, General Motors might have to be liquidated, but the assets would still be there if they're worth anything. Instead, after propping them up twice, once in the Bush administration, once in the Obama administration, they declared bankruptcy in June. But by that time, the federal government had a lot of money invested in those companies. And as a result, the end result of that was that they took a pretty significant ownership interest in Chrysler and GM. Minority interest in Chrysler, but the federal government now owns 61% of General Motors. It was just a nationalized auto company. The Canadian government also owns a share. The United Auto Workers got an ownership share in General Motors. And the stockholders were wiped out. And the bondholders ended up with 10% of the company converted into stock. So the bondholders got 10% of the company. Does anybody think it's a good idea to nationalize an automobile manufacturer like that? I guess we could debate it, but it seems to me we would have been better off to keep General Motors in the private sector, whatever was valuable in it, to have them declare bankruptcy in December with no federal money, rather than turn them into a nationalized auto company as we did when they declared bankruptcy in June. And once again, undermining that fundamental profit and loss foundation of the market economy. Another side effect of that was that the bondholders ended up getting maybe a bad deal on that. So as bondholders are holding secured debt, and the whole idea behind secured debt is, in the case of bankruptcy, you get first claim to the assets of the bankrupt firm. That's not what happened, because President Obama wanted to push through another package. And a bunch of the bondholders seemed to be willing to go along with that. And actually, the major bondholders in General Motors at the time were J.P. Morgan Chase, Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. And they seemed to be okay with the Obama plan. Why? Because they'd taken all that federal money already. And so after taking all the money from the federal government in the TARP program, can you complain when now the value of your bonds are eroded? So they may not have had much room to complain. But a problem with that is that it undermines the value of secured debt in general. The firms want to issue bonds. Right? And what they're telling bondholders is, in the event of a problem with this firm, if we declare bankruptcy, you have first claim on our assets. Is that right? Doesn't look like it anymore.